Hello, this is Keith UAPC. I'm doing a commentary on only the picking and banning phase for game taken from IPL4, and this is only the picking and banning phase. I'm not going to be commentating the rest of the game with it, so this will perhaps be interesting to you if you just like talking about picks and bans, but if you are more interested in watching a full game, this is probably not something you want to continue watching. Alrighty, so I'm going to be pausing and unpausing it just so I can talk about it on my at my own pace, and also because as I start the video up, they've already actually banned a few heroes. First off was, I think, we see an Udyr ban, who is fairly typical. I don't have a whole lot to say there, but then the Kurthus Kog'Maw bans on the other side, but Monomaniac are a bit less typical. The Kog'Maw is certainly a very frequently played hero, but he's not one that is so frequently banned. Usually, the bans are targeted more towards the AP middles because bot bot lane and AD carry supports are usually pretty versatile, and just by banning one of them out, you usually don't really change the outcome of the game that much. But I guess they want to see Kog'Maw not in the game. And they also ban out the Karthus, who is a bit of a strange one, a very strong hyper carry, but not one of the typical solo mid bans you would think of, but still a very strong hero nonetheless, and another one they get rid of. So I'll just unpause this and go back at normal pace for a moment. Karthus is, I'm not sure, but they respond with an Urgot ban, who again is Urgot's a very unique hero. He's got a very unique role on the team. You really have to play a bit differently against teams with an Urgot. He's very strong with his swap, plus his range poke can just be relentless and really whittle people down. I'll pause this real quick. So they also banned Cassiopeia and Ryze, two very typical solo mids. Rise especially considered by many people to be broken just because of the strength of the snare, the range snare, the instant range snare, his W. I think that really people talk about that a bit too much. In general, he's more strong just because of his overall package than anything. It's not just his amazing CC on a snare, but also his his ability to be durable while dealing damage, and not just burst damage, but also great sustain damage. The cooldown on his Q is very low. He's just strong pretty much everywhere. His only real weakness is that if you push him, he can't farm very well. That's his, I think, biggest weakness. So Monomaniac picks up the Lee Sin with the first pick. There are quite a few strong heroes in this pool. Lee Sin is definitely one of them. The advantage of first picking the Lee Sin as opposed to some other strong heroes that are available, like say the Shen or the Morgana or the Dr. Mundo or any of the hugely popular heroes that are open, is that Lee Sin is a very versatile pick in the sense that he can be in the top lane or in the jungle. So by first picking him, you don't reveal too much about your lineup. You leave yourself with a lot of flexibility, which is I think why they chose the Lee Sin in particular over some of the other heroes with the first pick. Dignitas will be responding. I'm not sure if they're going to assume that Lee Sin will be in the jungle or not. If they make an assumption, that will probably be a bit of a mistake. They have to be aware, I think, that it's a bit more of an open versatile pick. So they're responding with an Olaf, who is another hero who can be in both the top lane and the jungle, but he is more so than Lee Sin is usually thought of as being more suited to the jungle, whereas Olaf is more suited to the top lane. I think I've seen him in the jungle. I think even Monomaniac, the other team, played him in the jungle in some of the earlier games. But usually he's a top lane hero. It really sort of depends on your matchup. Even at this point, with them both having a Olaf and a Lee Sin who could both potentially be in the jungle or the top lane, I think where they end up at this point really depends on who the other hero is and what the matchups are before they really commit. The Dignitas also picks up the Corki, who is a very strong, very bursty in the mid game and also in the late game hero who can really bully someone in lane. Be a bit of a jerk. Now back to Monomaniac. For their next two picks, they pick up the Janna, who is a very strong support, and you usually see Janna, if she's not banned, she's probably taken in the first five picks almost every single game, I think, these days. She's just that popular. Some people do prefer Soraka instead still, but the amount of crowd control on Janna's tornadoes and her ultimate is very high. It looks like they've also taken up a Fizz, which is okay. Now they're changing the Fizz to the Riven. So the Riven is going to be either their top laner or their jungler. I actually am aware at this point that she is going to jungle, but I think at this point in the picking process, they still haven't decided. Like I said, you don't really, if you have someone who can jungle or top lane, if you have two picks already, the Lee Sin and the Riven, you don't really need to have it decided until you see who the enemy's top lane and jungler are, and you know what the matchups are, and then you make your decision. So even at this point, I think that they haven't necessarily decided on who they would pick. The Taric support is a bit of a surprise to me. I would have guessed that they would pick the Soraka support, just simply because Soraka, I think, is generally considered stronger all around than Taric, and in particular, her synergy with Corki and Lane to give him mana is very strong. I guess Taric sets up a lot more kill potential in lane with his ability to stun, plus if he chooses to use his W to shatter their armor, they can do a lot of burst, and Corki is a hero that's pretty strong at bursting if they want to play it aggressive. And Soraka a bit more passive. And they also pick up Mundo to be the jungler. So at this point, Monomaniac knows that Mundo is almost certainly a jungler. I haven't seen anyone playing him top lane. I mean, you could, but in this metagame, he is just sort of the atypical jungler. So at this point, Monomaniac is faced with the decision: do we want to lane Riven against Olaf plus Lee Sin against Mundo? And really, in that matchup, I like the Olaf against the Riven, and I like the Mundo against the Lee Sin. Or they could switch, and they could do the Lee Sin against the Olaf, who I think would fares a bit better than the Riven would, plus the Riven against Mundo. And Riven against Mundo, before watching this tournament, I really had no idea how that matchup would work out, but I think that even though they picked this Riven before the Mundo, they may likely have known or suspected that Dignitas would be juggling with the Mundo. I mean, it's pretty likely, more than a 50% chance, I would say. And so, given that, they may be confident in the Riven Mundo jungle matchup, because Mundo's strength is usually that his jungle matchup is basically that he wins against pretty much anyone that anyone else is playing. If it's a Shyvana or what have you, he's just strong and he does well. So I think that they may have played some practice games and had Riven in mind as someone who is capable of jungling against Mundo and being able to successfully duel him, plus not being shut down too hard by his counter jungling. So I think that's probably something that they had prepared. And to round out their team, they pick up the Graves as their AD carry, which is certainly, or actually they haven't chosen yet, so I shouldn't jump the gun. They're thinking Ashe is open, Ezreal is, I wouldn't pick Ezreal laning against Corki, just does not work out well for your. Corki's just kind of playing better, I think, in that matchup. And Graves certainly wild pick, Ashe another one. They're thinking going best. They already have two bruisers, so they have a pretty strong front line. So Ashe is usually good for her kiting, but with such a strong front line, plus even Jan, I think you can play a bit more of a more fragile AD carry, perhaps one that's not so reliant on kiting. They also pick up the Morgana, who is certainly a very strong hero that you almost always see banned. And Morgana has a lot of utility and not quite so much damage, so perhaps they didn't want to go Ashe and Morgana simply because they felt they'd be a bit lacking in the damage department, a bit too much utility per se, because both Ashe and Morgana are sort of utility heroes as opposed to bursty ones. I think they have Morgana to bring them the utility they need, plus they have the Graves just as a bit more slanted towards the damage. Also, Graves' weakness main weakness, I guess, is that his range is a bit shorter than Ash, but I guess they feel they have a very strong front line with both a Riven and a Lee Sin, so that Graves' lower range won't be too much of a detriment to him, especially with the enemy jungler being the Mundo, who is a great jungler, but if there's any... The biggest difference, I think, between the Bruiser lineup is that Mundo is not quite as damaging and as threatening as the Riven or the Lee Sin. The Corki will be a lot more afraid of having a Lee Sin and a Riven in his face, and the Graves will be of having a Mundo and an Olaf in his face when it comes down to the team fights later. One more pick remaining, that'll be the AP carry middle, and actually they pick up a Soraka, which is very surprising because, well, it's something I've seen Scara stream when he does solo queue, but I didn't think it was something that he would play in a tournament. I thought it was more of a gimmicky pick. A lot of people make fun of it and say that she pushes her lane so hard simply because when you're playing Soraka, you usually want to harass the enemy with your star call, which is great for harassment, but it sort of has the perhaps unfortunate side effect of pushing the lane when you may not necessarily have wanted to do so. So it's sort of an interesting pick. I don't think this team is the greatest for Soraka support. Usually, or for Soraka solo mid, she's great usually with the double AP team because she gives the MR shred to the other AP hero who's laning top lane, but they're not running the double AP team, so it's a bit of a, I think, a strange pick for Soraka. I know she's laning against the Morgana. It's hard to pick someone specific to go against Morgana because Morgana, worst case scenario, she farms at her tower with Tormented Soil, and even if she doesn't get as much farm as she might have, she still gets enough that her ultimate and her shield, just the utility on them alone is great late game, even if you take her down a little bit in farm. But it'll be hard, I think, for Soraka to zone Morgana, because typically to zone them you have to really be very aggressive moving forward so you can hit them with that star call, but if she does that she'll be very open to being hit with the Dark Binding Tormented Soil combo. It'll be interesting to see how it works out, and well, actually I think I even already watched this game, so although I don't remember it, well, actually I remember the Riven, I don't remember actually. Oh yeah, now I remember. But yeah, it's an interesting game, and I think I should even give the link. So if you watch this and you didn't watch the live cast, I'm actually going to try and go and find the link because this was a very interesting game. Anyways, thank you for watching. Keep it over and out.